Hey there, everybody. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from a remote, undisclosed location in Columbia, Maryland, hanging out with the folks at DonorSearch, our sponsors of the Philanthropy Mastermind series since 2016. So, first of all, thank you to them for not only hosting this series, but for having a great event here in Maryland. And that's why you see this kind of strange location behind me. But it's great to welcome you here, wherever I happen to be, and wherever you are. And to another session in this series. We're going to have a friend of the series and a friend, I think, to most of us in fundraising here on screen with us in a second. He's appearing. You may be able to see him waving at you. And that is Stephen Shattuck, who I'm going to introduce to you in just a second. But first, I want to welcome you and encourage you to participate today by using the chat, by using the, of course, the Q&A, whatever you'd like to do. We want to make sure this is built around you, and also encourage you to fill out a little survey you're going to see at the very end. That's how we know what you want to see and hear throughout the year. We're going to be doing 2 sessions. That's our goal, 2 sessions per week, plus a podcast per week. So we can only build all that if we're really hearing from you. So please do let us know. And we can start on that right now. In fact, if you don't mind, if you have the inclination, you can go ahead and just let us know where you're coming in from today, maybe which organization and which city and state, maybe which country. We'd love to know. If you just go ahead and warm up the chat for our guest, Stephen Shattuck. And Stephen, oh, thank you all for doing that. So Marianne, who else is there? Let's see. We've got a lot of people plugging in already. Wow, Carolyn, Heather, Jeremy, Jeff, Nicole, Ellie, thank you all very much. Kim, oh, this is awesome. And you really are from everywhere, from Chicago to, my gosh, Erie, Pennsylvania, Grandmother's Village Project. Nice to see you, Newton, Mass. Wow, this is great. What a great crowd. So good to have you all here today for another session. We're going to be talking, of course, about the state of capital campaigns. And who better to do that than a person who's been kind of living and breathing that from one angle or another for quite some time. And that is, of course, Stephen Shattuck. You probably know that already. He's the author, among other things, of Robots Make Bad Fundraisers, both the best title and one of the books you want on your shelf. Robots Make Bad Fundraisers, How Nonprofits Can Maintain the Heart in the Digital Age. I know that book's been out for a little while, but it does not grow old. So if you don't have it, get it. That's the last commercial you'll hear today, but I did want to share that with you. Stephen, among other things, is currently the Director of Engagement at Capital Campaign Pro. We'll make sure to include his contact data at the conclusion of the presentation today. And I want to go ahead and answer Tracy's question right now. Will a recording of today's webinar be shared? Watch for an email that'll come to you within 24 hours with a link to a recording of the session. So watch for that and don't go away, because you'll want to know how you can get that and other information with a little QR code at the end. You're welcome. In addition to working with Capital Campaign Pro, you may know Stephen's background, of course, serving in the past as Chief Engagement Officer at Bloomerang, company many of us know, and he's also been a frequent presenter at, well, just about everything from AFP Icon to NATO, Cause Camp, many other things. A great guy who has been doing a lot of work on figuring out exactly where we are on capital campaigns. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Stephen, thanks so much for hanging out today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you for joining. I know it's a busy time of year. Maybe you're still getting caught up with year-end thank you letters and all the other fun stuff that we as fundraisers have to do. So thanks for being here, taking an hour out of your day. You're awesome. I will try my best to make the hour worth it. I know Jay said no commercials, but thanks to DonorSearch. I just love DonorSearch. They're awesome. If you're not using DonorSearch, what are you doing? You gotta use them. So yeah, let me bring up my slides here because I got some good stuff. Hopefully this works. Yeah, I think that's working. And yeah, ask questions as we go along. I've got the chat box on the other screen here so I can see those as they come in. If I see something I can answer right away, I will do that. You won't bother me at all. And then we're also going to save some time at the end for a formal Q&A. So don't be shy. Would love to hear from you. And if you haven't told us where you're from, tell us in the chat if you joined late. I'm here in Indianapolis, rainy Indianapolis. I'm in my undisclosed basement office. My wife and I both work from home, and she gets the nice upstairs office because that's the kind of guy I am. So let's jump into it. You already heard about me. I guess the only other thing I'll say is I love doing research. And when Capital Campaign Pro came calling, I knew immediately that we needed to do some formal research on the topic because none really exists. There's a lot of, anecdotes out there, case studies of how people have done their campaigns, and that's great. And hopefully people still do that and keep doing that. That is always very valuable to the sector. but there isn't really a formal research study into what goes into a capital campaign, why people do capital campaigns, how successful are they? Lots of fun questions we wanted to answer. So that is what we did at Capital Campaign Pro late last summer. We released this report, and I've been talking about it to anyone who will listen. And for you all, if you maybe knew about this report but didn't participate, by being here, we're going to invite you to the next survey, which I'm probably going to do starting in March, just in a couple of months from now, for the next report that'll come out this summer. So this is something that we want to build on year after year. I was telling Jay before we started that it's kind of my desire to have a living, breathing database of capital campaigns that is interactive, that people can go to maybe when they're in a campaign or just thinking about doing one, because we want to help. And there's no reason for anyone to go it alone in this sector, whether it's a capital campaign or any other kind of fundraising methodology. So why do we do this? Already talked about it a little bit, but a couple other things besides the fact that it didn't exist is, the last 3 years or so were kind of unique. I don't think I need to tell anyone what I'm talking about there. And one question we had, as we have been helping people do capital campaigns, is did the pandemic, did the economic uncertainty of the last couple months and years specifically, did that change how people approach capital campaigns and how they actually administer them? That was another big question we wanted to answer. And then the other thing is, when we talk to people, and I don't think anyone who does capital campaigns would disagree with this, is it's a big deal. It's a big campaign, multi-millions of dollars. For a lot of people, it's their first major thing that maybe the organization has done or them as a fundraiser has done. And it's scary. And I understand that. I can only imagine what people go through, over several years to make a capital campaign happen. But a lot of times that comes with some maybe unfounded fears that we have to kind of talk people down from, like, you can do this and it is possible. And we wanted to show that with empirical data rather than just kind of, the opinions and anecdotes that sort of rule the blogosphere and the webinar spaces prior to this research. So that's why we did it. So methodology, back last summer, we put out a survey to, anyone who would answer it. And we did verify the information afterwards, but we put out a public survey that was broken into kind of 3 cohorts. And we invited people to kind of self-select into the cohort that described them. People that are just thinking about a capital campaign, they think they're going to do one probably in the next couple years. People who are currently in a capital campaign right now. It's not done, but they're in the thick of it. These campaigns can last for multiple years. So we wanted to know, hey, how's it going? In addition to kind of why you did it. And then people who have recently, so within the past year or two, completed a campaign. So the first question was, who are you? And if you're neither of those things, we kind of whisked them off and we parted as friends. But depending on which one they choose, there was a series of questions that really just pertained to that particular cohort. It tended to build. So, the people who were done with a campaign, we asked them all the same questions of the other phases, but the inverse was not true. So the survey kind of got longer as you went along. And to our great happiness, we got 275 kind of verifiable sets of surveys. So couple of things we did, we just honed in on just the US and Canada, because that is a very particular kind of fundraising culture. We verified all the identities, we verified the campaigns, removed duplicates, all that great stuff, and collated the data and poured through it and found some really interesting findings. And those findings is what I am here to highlight for you over the next 40 minutes or so. So that's how we did it. And this is the kind of things that we asked. This is not by any means exhaustive. It was quite a long survey, but these are the questions that I really kind of pulled out the most interesting findings from. Some things that surprised us, some things that didn't surprise us, but sort of gelled with the things that we tell people, at least in our practice. Number one is, are capital campaigns typically successful? The number one question we get when people approach us for help is this going to work? Do capital campaigns usually pan out? If they don't, I don't know that we want to do this. We don't want to roll the dice, so to speak. That was a big question that we asked here, and I'll not tease the information. I'll get through this first. A big one, maybe even bigger than the first one, is what happens to the annual fund during and after a capital campaign? This is a big one. Does it cannibalize the annual fund, right? Are we going to just kind of take away from the annual fund to fuel the capital campaign? And if depending on the degree to which that happens, is it even worth it, right? That's another really big thing that we hear from people. We want to do a capital campaign, but if it comes at the expense of the annual fund and future annual funds, what's the point? So that's a big one that we wanted to ask people about for sure. Does conducting a feasibility study matter? So a feasibility study is a very common kind of component of capital campaigns where you're testing the goal, you're talking to key stakeholders, existing major donors to kind of get their sense of what they think about the campaign. Does it matter? Does it change the goal? Does it make campaigns more or less successful, depending on if you do that or not? That's one we looked at as well. And yes, we are going to send the presentation, the slides, and the recording afterwards. So if you're just joining, you'll be okay there. We'll get you all this good stuff. Mentioned this before, but the last couple of years, what did that have? What kind of bearing did that have on the capital campaign? What were some of the challenges and benefits besides just raising the money? Okay, great, we hit our $10 million goal, but were there other good things that happened that maybe we didn't expect? We wanted to kind of quantify those and find out if that occurred. And then, what were the challenges besides raising the money? Was it, getting the board on board? Was it, actually soliciting the donors, creating the collateral? We kind of wanted to know where most people are feeling perhaps a little bit of friction during the campaign. Not that it, derailed the campaign, but every major endeavor comes with its difficulties, and we kind of wanted to know what those were across the board. And then a big one, and perhaps some of you are listening here, sometimes small shops approach us and say, can we even do a capital campaign? We're small. We only raise $1 million. We only raise $250,000, as if that is a small amount. That's not a small amount to me by any means. Does that cohort of donors, and that was an arbitrary dividing line, $1 million or less is how we define small shops. Don't mean that to be demeaning or pejorative in any way. We just kind of needed some line of demarcation. But those organizations, compared to everyone else above $1 million, how were their successes or challenges or benefits different from the rest of the field, if at all? So those are the main things that I have for you today, but there's lots of other good stuff in the research, and we'll give you the ability to download it and kind of pour through it yourself later on. So a little bit more about that 275-ish people who joined us. So about 124 of them, 124, not about 124 of them were in that sort of pre-campaign planning. And like I said, we're asking them questions like, why do you think you want to do this? What are you raising money for? Did the last couple of years, 3 years, delay you in any way, or did you just keep pushing forward? Are you going to staff up for this? Are you going to look for a consultant? That was kind of the breakdown of questions there. And then you can kind of see that it was pretty evenly distributed by sort of annual fundraising amount range. So that is true of all 3 cohorts. So this is kind of I think a nice cross section of the entire sector. And like I said, it'll continue to grow as we do this survey in subsequent years. People who are in the campaign, what have so far been the biggest challenges and benefits? Are you on track? How are you feeling? Did you do a feasibility study? How has that mattered? And then crucially, in the campaign, what has happened to the annual fund as you have been in this campaign? Has it gone down? Has it gone up? Has it stayed the same? That was a big question we asked this group. And again, pretty good distribution of the revenue size. And then the last cohort, people who have finished. This was by far the most comprehensive of all the surveys, everything from the previous 2 surveys. And then, what were the results? What happened to the annual fund? What has happened to the annual fund in subsequent years post-campaign, right? Because it's one thing if everything is fine, stays the same during the campaign, but then if it goes up or down, that's definitely remarkable, and we want to kind of capture that. So smaller cohort for sure, because of, the fact that they were already done with the campaign. And Jay reminded me, and this is, I think, important, of the 275, there were in the single digits clients of ours. We didn't really want this to just be, hey, these are our clients and, look how great they are. That wasn't our goal at all. We wanted a very good, broad snapshot of the entire sector because, we have our data. We can compare that if we want to. So an open invite to all of you, if you'd like to participate in this in a few months, or if you're watching this recording, reach out to me because it may not be too late. We would love that. Everything stays anonymous. All the data is very secure. We kind of verify everything behind the scenes. So those are the 3 cohorts. Those are the kinds of things we asked. And here are, excuse me, the kind of the top findings. Number 1 is, yes, capital campaigns are typically successful. We had very few people say things are not going well. We weren't happy with the results. It seems if you do embark on this campaign in a serious way, I think you'll be happy with the results. That's not to say that a capital campaign is easy or that, your mileage may vary, but it's not necessarily something with a low sort of success rate that is anywhere documented, let alone in this study. Very happily, this was something we thought would happen, but it looks as though most of the time annual funds either stay the same or increase during and after the campaign. So this is kind of one thing I see a lot in the sector. Jay kind of mentioned my previous experience, but there's a lot of things like this that kind of float around the nonprofit sector. Like, does Giving Tuesday cannibalize year-end giving? Do capital campaigns cannibalize annual fund? Does asking volunteers to donate also, is that going to ruin their volunteerism? I have always been a champion of going for it. And this is another area where it seems like that can pay dividends or at least maintain, what you have been doing all along. So I'm going to dig into the details of that, but have no fear. And there are a lot of reasons why an annual fund can suffer during a campaign. Those are very real things, and we'll talk about them. But there are also things that can be, sidestepped and avoided somewhat easily. Another thing that made us happy, and I think has made readers of this happy, is you don't need a wealthy board. You don't need millions of dollars to come from your board to have a successful capital campaign. This is another thing we hear a lot. Like, we're a grassroots organization, and the people on our board look like our community who we serve, and that's great, and that's what you should do. Rather than going out and saying, let's just get all the rich people on our board because they'll support us financially. You don't need that to have a successful capital campaign. Now, board engagement is key for sure. And that's a different thing, and we'll talk about it. But again, be encouraged that, all the money doesn't have to come from the board. In fact, it probably shouldn't for a couple of different reasons that we'll talk about. Small shops are successful. I'll show you the details on that. But if you're sitting here and you're in that under $1 million camp, which again is a completely arbitrary dividing line for us, but we need a dividing line, you're in good shape. You can do it. Excuse me. A mentor of mine has always said the only difference is the amount of zeros. You can do it. And in fact, small shops in a couple of data points outperformed everybody else, which was really fun to see. And we'll talk about that in a second. Most people did not delay because of the events of 22 through, right now. We're still dealing with, perhaps a looming recession. Most people kept their foot on the gas, which is great. And what we would have encouraged people to do as well. Because if you have a good case for support, you can keep going. You don't have to let global events or even local events stop you. And in fact, they may even be something that kind of buoys the campaign, depending on how you communicate that. Conducting a feasibility study did seem to matter in certain ways, particularly when it came to building donor relationships. So we'll talk about that. And then one that didn't really surprise us, but it's good to kind of state plainly, is that for most people, strategic planning is what led to a capital campaign. So as opposed to things like a new ED or CEO or some sort of new initiative, what we see happen and what was confirmed in the data is that if you go through strategic planning, very common that you'll come out of that saying, you know what, it's time for a capital campaign. We have big goals and vision. Let's go out and make something big happen. So we're going to dig into the details of all of those. But like I said, this is just kind of a snapshot of all the stuff that's in the data. There's lots more good stuff in there if you want to check it out. So let's dig into the details. So are campaigns successful? Yes, only 6% of people polled said that they didn't consider their campaign a success. So that was great. Now, to be fair, this is a survey of capital campaigns. Were people coming out of the woodwork to clamor and say that they weren't successful? I don't know. Maybe they. I don't know why they wouldn't have, but it didn't seem to come through in this data. So 94% success rate, which is great. And the other interesting thing was we asked people what percent of their goal did they raise, and the average amount there was 108%. So 8% above goal, which was great. And the lowest reported was only 75% below goal, which is not, catastrophic by any means. That's probably still a lot of money, which is great and is going to do a lot of good in the world. But the highest reported person was 170%. I'm still trying to get that person to join me on this webinar because you should hear from them, not me. They're doing some really cool things there. So good job by them. But on the small shop details, the average amount raised there was 3.5 million compared to a little over 11 million for everyone above $1 million in annual revenue. So again, it's just the zeros. It doesn't mean that you can't do it because you are a small shop. There's only small visions. There's no small shops out there, but that's kind of my mantra there. So be encouraged if maybe you're on the fence saying like, can we do it? Is it going to go badly? Do most of these crash and burn? Doesn't seem to be the case, but it doesn't mean that you can't ask for help and seek out help, because there's a lot of really good people out there who help with capital campaigns. I'm not just talking about our firm. There's a lot of help out there, and it's available if you want it. Annual fund. So this was a big one. What happens in the annual fund? Is it cannibalized? So we split this question by cohort, right? So we asked everyone what happened during the campaign. So people in the campaign and people who have finished a campaign both answered this question. 40% said it stayed the same. 39% said it actually went up during the campaign, and 21% said it went down. So pretty evenly split there, although that's almost 80% either stayed the same or increased. So again, it's not a thing that by its nature is automatically going to cannibalize the annual fund. There again are a lot of reasons why that can happen. Sometimes when, depending on how you sort of code gifts or sort of apply them to the actual donor intent, that's one thing. There's many other things, but it's not something that is a foregone conclusion by any means. Then what we did is we asked the post-campaign cohort what has happened to the annual fund after the campaign. Now, a lot of these people, not enough time has passed, which is another reason why we're going to keep building on it. Maybe not a full year has elapsed since the capital campaign ended. But for those that it had, 28% said that it increased, 6% said it stayed the same, and 9% said it decreased. And the rest of the 100% said that not enough time has passed. So one thing I'm going to do in a couple months is check in with those people so we can get more comprehensive data here. But it looks like the split there pretty closely mirrors the split here of the annual fund during the campaign. So if you're in a capital campaign, if you're thinking about one, this is a question you might want to ask of your staff, the consultants, or the agency that you hire to help you, because there are some very concrete things you can do to avoid this, right? It's not an automatic that nothing is going to change, but it's also not an automatic that things are going to go bad. So be aware of that as you kind of embark on this, if that's in your immediate future. Okay, so feasibility study. So feasibility study, just real quick, if folks aren't maybe familiar with that term, this is one that you're not trying to decide, can we do the campaign? That decision should have already occurred. What you're doing here is the goal correct? can we get some major stakeholders on board here? And then can we go back and kind of revise those things based on what we hear in those conversations, right? It's like plan giving, where the terminology probably doesn't describe it very well. I like to say legacies or bequests, because most giving is planned, right? And that's not my observation. There's been a million smart people who have made that observation before me, but kind of a weird term. But that's kind of how we think about it, at least, is testing the goal, getting some people involved in the quiet phase, and going back and making sure that what we think can happen is going to align with kind of our community. That happens early in the campaign. If you're not kind of familiar with where that lays in the campaign timeline, it's part of the planning phase, kind of kicks off the quiet phase in some ways, because perhaps those conversations lead to one-on-one asks. But it's early on. So we highlight it because it is something that happens early on. We want to know, okay, what was the impact on the rest of the campaign that is, going to be months and years after that. So really interesting. This is where I was really kind of slicing and dicing the data and trying to find some interesting comparisons here. So one thing I found is that I mentioned before, and I'll get into the details of this later on, but one question we asked was, other than the amount of money that you raised, what were some of the other benefits that you saw? And I looked at those answers and cross-referenced whether or not they had done a feasibility study to see if the answer kind of mix changed there. So among folks who didn't do a feasibility study, 66% of them said that another benefit of the campaign was that their major donor relationships were strengthened. Great. 2/3 of them said that their relationships improved, which is great. We would expect that from a capital campaign. But among the people who did do a feasibility study, that number went up to 94%. So almost all of them cited strengthening major donor relationships as another ancillary benefit to the campaign, which is great. And to me, makes logical sense, because it was very likely that those major donors were a part of the feasibility study process. They were maybe people that were interviewed, talked to one-on-one to kind of get that feedback. So of course, that's going to strengthen the relationship, because you're having that candid dialogue, perhaps. Lori, that's a question that is in the details. We asked people whether they did it themselves or used a consultant. So that's a great example of something that's in the fine detail of the report. And then another comparison. So I looked at the percentage of their campaign goal raised by whether or not they did a feasibility study. For folks who didn't, the average was 101, which is great. So above 100%. So again, that kind of speaks to the campaign success rate, of course, but then that went up to 115% of the campaign goal raised if they did do a feasibility study. So again, there are reasons not to do a feasibility study, and there are lots of methodologies to doing one, as Lori is alluding to in the chat very adroitly. But it does look like that you can be successful with that one, of course, depending on how you do it. But if you do it, it does seem like there are some dividends paid there if you go ahead and make that investment. And then we also asked people who did do a feasibility study, did your campaign goal change afterwards? And 51% of them said, yeah, it actually went up. So before talking to all these stakeholders, we actually thought it was this number, but it turns out, they were confident that we could raise more. And that's great. 18% said it actually decreased, which is not bad. That may have brought it more into realistic terms. And 31%, a little under a third, said that no, it didn't actually change, but perhaps we got some of those other benefits there. So could, if for an example, if you want to do a feasibility study, but maybe you're trying to convince your boss or your board, here's some backing for you. Perhaps you might want to cite this data. And again, your mileage may vary, but again, be encouraged that there are some benefits to going through the investment there. And this is something that we see with our clients, obviously, who do one. And I think anyone who does feasibility studies would say that is also the case. We ask people what prompted your campaign, whether they were pre-planning or in the campaign or done. Like I said, it's mostly strategic planning, but there were some other interesting things there. Other was a write-in response, and you can see those individual things there. An organization anniversary was something that popped up quite often. You know, it's the 100th anniversary of our college, or it's the 50th birthday of our clinic, or whatever that is. That tends to maybe at least spurn some conversations. What was interesting, and it's not reflected in the slide, but the anniversary number was higher in the pre-campaign cohort. You know, a lot of people thought that was the reason, but as I looked at the data of people in a campaign and after a campaign, it actually dropped. And I'm wondering if people who thought that that was the main case for support, once they kind of got into the process, decided actually there's a stronger case for support, or perhaps they sort of pivoted towards different messaging. Because you know, a birthday is fine, but it's not necessarily a super strong case outside perhaps alumni among certain organizations. But if you can say, you know what, we need a new building. This building is you know, fallen down. We got to expand. We're bursting at the seams. That's usually a much better case for support. And again, something that comes out of strategic planning. Other things, you know, a challenge gift kind of motivating a campaign getting going, or maybe the leadership saying, you know what, it's time for you know, us to think big and really expand. But for the most part, it's strategic planning there for sure. What is the money being raised for? Probably won't surprise you to see that the biggest thing was new capital improvements or new buildings. You know, we've got to expand. We're bursting at the seams. We need a new shelter. We need a new clinic. We got a men's clinic. Now we need a women's clinic in the same town. You know, that wasn't super surprising there. Endowment, you know, is something that comes up for sure. Again, that was one that kind of tailed off as people got into the campaign, because perhaps they switched to some different cases of support there, or different case for support. New initiatives, you know, maybe we are expanding our service area was something that would fall under that umbrella. And then people were able to say, you know, all of these things, or a couple of these things for sure. But usually it's a building, a renovation, or some sort of expansion of services there. So nothing groundbreaking, but I just wanted to share that to kind of set the table there. This was a big thing. We asked people in all cohorts, did you pause due to the pandemic? So people who were just planning a campaign last summer, when I asked, was that a campaign that you were thinking of doing in 2020, but that you pushed? Or people in a campaign or after a campaign, you know, did you delay it even though you just finished? And most people said no. And we were kind of surprised by this. We thought it would be higher. We didn't think it would be overwhelmingly yes, but it was great to see that, you know, basically 3/4 of people kept their foot on the gas. And that's what I tell people. That's what I told people 3 years ago when I was at Bloomerang. That's what I told people, you know, from in the previous, you know, whatever it was, whether it was a localized natural disaster. And I know I'm not trying to make light of the pandemic. There was nothing close to that level of urgency there for sure. But, you know, if you're an organization that is doing great stuff and you have a clear case for support, not only should you keep your foot on the gas, in my opinion, but, you know, challenging times do tend to generate philanthropic mindsets among donors. You know, they want to help out. That urgency of need can maybe fuel your campaign. So, you know, the pandemic's not over. It's not what I'm trying to say, but, you know, there will be something that either affects you locally, that affects all of us. Don't let that stop you, because you're worth it. If you've got a great thing to raise money for, a great need, you know, let's do it. Don't decide for donors. That's kind of the main thing. We also asked people, so, you know, last summer, things weren't as clear, perhaps, as they are now on January 25th of 2024. I know it's tough for a lot of people there economically, for sure. But, you know, last summer, it was like, dang, for sure, a recession. It's going to be ugly, you know, going into 2024. It seems a little better than maybe that prognosis was back then. So I wanted to ask the question, because things were looking a little murky, has that, and that chatter began long before last summer, has that affected you? Again, actually, even a higher amount said no, we're not letting that stop us. Again, clear case for support. You have a need. Let's keep going. Be encouraged, because there's gonna be something else, whether it's this or something new that we can't even imagine. An election, I would put that in the category here coming up in a few months. Keep going. Don't decide for your donors. If they say no, or if they don't answer because they can't, that's fine. But don't assume, that, oh, people aren't going to give. It's too wild out there, or people's wallets are hurting too much. Don't decide for them. Keep going. Let them decide. Okay, let's get into the fun stuff. If you're not already having fun, hope you're having fun. Chat if you're having fun. If you're not, that's good feedback for me too. And by the way, I love the questions, so keep them coming. You don't have to wait till we get to the end of the hour here. Biggest challenges. So we gave people kind of a menu of things to choose from, in addition to kind of an other write-in chat box. These were the biggest challenges that people said were prevalent. So 48% of people said that a major challenge for them were, those external factors. So they didn't stop because of those. They didn't pause the campaign, but they were still challenges. And of course, that makes perfect sense, right? They don't decide for the donor by not doing the campaign, but those still come up. I can't give as much. I'll keep my annual fund gift, but I can't go beyond that. Those kinds of things, of course. And that's probably always going to be the case whenever we ask this question. But interestingly, the next two, the kind of the number 2 and 3 things, 40%, they struggle with getting the board excited. And this is something that I saw as a big success factor, right? So I looked at the 60% of people who didn't say that that was a big challenge, and probably won't surprise you to hear that their campaigns, by and large, were more successful in terms of the amount of their goal raised, was kind of the main metrics of success I used there. And then 35% identifying the top campaign prospects. Well, gee golly, get DonorSearch, right? Because that's going to help you. There's help out there. You don't have to do that alone. Great wealth screening tools like DonorSearch. And having those relationships helps a lot. It's one thing to screen a random rich stranger in your city, but if you've got those relationships built, knowing a little bit of intelligence about their capacity is really going to help here as you create your gift range chart, as maybe you're deciding on who are the people we're going to interview in the feasibility study process. That's a big thing there. I got ahead of myself. I forgot I put this in here. So I mentioned this, but of the people who said that the board engagement was an issue for them, 75% of those people, 75% of the and it's getting it's a lot of math for a Thursday afternoon, but a big chunk of that group said that they didn't achieve 100% board giving specifically. So of course, if the board isn't engaged, probably not going to be giving a lot to the campaign either. Maybe they don't believe in it, or they haven't bought into it. So the money tends to follow belief and engagement. So there's a lot of help specifically on this piece. So if you're planning a campaign, this is another question to ask your team or your outside counsel, if you have it. What's the board engagement component going to be? And if those people give you kind of a blank stare, that's a red flag, because that's a big piece of the campaign success as well. Another fun one. So besides all that money for the new hospital, which is great, or whatever, what were some of the other benefits? And again, we gave people a list of things that they could sort of select, and we looked at the ones that came up the most. Number one biggest benefit, and you saw the breakdown between whether or not they did a feasibility study, but 72% said that, you know what, our major donor relationships are even stronger because of the campaign. That's great. That's going to have so many long tail benefits going forward. Plan giving, or I should say bequests, since I made fun of the name earlier. That's a big thing that we kind of see years and years down the line come out of those relationships that were strengthened during a capital campaign. So that's great. That's another one that you can say maybe to a hesitant coworker or board member was like, I don't know if we can do this. That's a big one. Other things is professional development, right? This is a campaign that is involved, can last for years. Hopefully your staff stays on for the duration of it. If they do, they're going to get skilled up by virtue of going through the process. You know, if you're a fundraiser working somewhere and you're, you know, year after year kind of doing the same things, you know, having that experience of, you know, we went through a capital campaign. I did that. I've never been through it before. And now I'm better at asking for large gifts one-on-one. I'd never done that. And I got over that fear if there was fear, and I got experience. That's a great thing. Effectiveness in general, that was kind of a broad term there that we asked people. Yeah, the staff in general feels more effective at what they do, not just in soliciting large gifts, but in general. So almost 40% of people said that was a big benefit. Better internal systems. You know, maybe they were able to kind of put some policies and procedures in place. Maybe they actually invested in tools like a DonorSearch that's going to benefit them after the campaign. And then a little under a third said that the board became more engaged in fundraising. So this, in a lot of ways, is my favorite slide, because if you're feeling that trepidation yourself, or maybe you're encountering trepidation from coworkers, there's so many other cool benefits to doing a campaign. Don't sit on the sidelines, especially if you need a new building. You've got an existing donor base. Let's go, because you're probably going to get it, and you're going to get a lot of other things happen in your organization that are going to benefit you long after the campaign. And speaking about staff retention, I would hope that if you put someone or some people in a campaign, skill them up, get them that professional development, I would hope they would, you know, kind of return that with sticking with you, right? So again, staff retention could be another perhaps benefit to doing the campaign there. This is one where we're not doing great, but there is a little bit of a silver lining. So we asked people some questions about their campaign committees. One was, did you successfully recruit people of color and other underrepresented groups for your campaign committee? So a success factor we believe in, at least, is that people on your campaign committees should, you know, look like the community you serve, right? Getting those diverse perspectives in on that committee. For people that have recently completed the campaign, only 13% of them said that they did that. Whether it was they tried and failed, it wasn't top of mind. I'm guessing it wasn't top of mind for most of these people. But one thing that was interesting is, for people in a campaign, that narrowed to a 50-50 ratio. So it improved quite a bit. I am totally guessing that what happened there was the people who, with the 50-50 ratio, people in a campaign, they probably started their campaign after a lot of the events of 2020, where a lot of people became more aware of this. Versus the people that have completed a campaign, maybe that campaign was in the late, you know, 2010s, 20-teens, and perhaps it wasn't as top of mind as it became over the last 2 or 3 years. So it seems like there's some improvement on that score, but 50-50 is not great, you know, in a vacuum. That should be a lot higher, in my opinion, but it does seem to be getting better. So I would encourage, and this is something we believe in, I don't think we're the only ones, is make sure that campaign committee has a lot of diverse perspectives, because for a campaign of this nature that is so, you know, overarching for your mission, you're going to want those voices for sure. Small shops, you're great. You can do it. The only difference was how much was raised on average. The success rates were right there, and I think it was 94% instead of 96% overall for all the cohorts. But what was interesting is, here's something you don't hear every day. Small shops actually fared better in a couple of different categories. The first thing here is not an example of that, but interesting, was that for most of the people that said they were under $1 million annually, this was their first campaign. And that makes sense, right? Because, you know, if you're a $50, $100 million organization, having never done a capital campaign, that's probably not as common. You've been around longer. You probably have been growing and needed to expand and perhaps build a new building or whatever. So not a big surprise there. Talked about the 3.5 versus I think it was 11.4 million that everyone raised. But success rates were just about the same. But what was interesting is not so good, that they were less likely to work with a consultant, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe they had someone on staff, even though it was a small team, that had gone through a campaign in the past. That's great. Maybe they didn't need a consultant, and some campaigns don't need consultants. That's fine. They were less likely to have a campaign budget. That's kind of one I'm struggling to defend. And this one may hurt Jay's feelings, is they were less likely to do a batch screening. Maybe it was because they have a smaller donor set, but I would still encourage it. Back from my Bloomerang and data days, it's always good to have that intelligence on your donors. But the good news was these folks actually reported higher levels of major donor relationship building and those internal system improvements. And this to me makes sense. It's a smaller team, I would assume, if they're a smaller shop revenue-wise. Those relationships probably already were close-knit, and this brought them even closer. And then again, a small team, everyone is probably going to be involved in the campaign rather than it just being a couple people, in that department, they're handling it. And then if it was the first campaign, that's going to be a catalyst for kind of getting some things in order, establishing some new systems, improving current systems. So that all kind of makes sense as I look at it, but didn't necessarily, predict that was going to be the case. So bottom line is, if you're a small shop, and again, that's an arbitrary definition by me, you can do it. It's just the amount of money is really the only difference there. But that's not to say that you couldn't exceed that $11.4 million average by any means there. This is one we need to work on as well. We asked people who finished a campaign, did 100% of your board members make a donation? Only about 2/3 said yes. And we asked people in a campaign, have they made a gift so far? The numbers weren't great as well. And really, these are gifts you should probably get early on in the process. Like, this number should be 100% early on, quite honestly, not to just put too fine a point on it. And you saw in some of the other data that this tends to follow a lack of engagement, which is probably a result of lack of buy-in. So really important piece there. But we didn't couch this by dollar amount. To us, it doesn't matter what they gave. And again, them not giving 6-7-figure gifts was not a success factor at all. It's whether or not they're engaged, they're giving something. A big chunk of your money raised in a capital campaign does not have to come from the board. In fact, we found that only about 14% of the dollars raised came from the board. And the median was 9 and the mode was 10. So you saw how successful campaigns are without this. Imagine, if the board giving numbers went from 2/3 to 100%. These numbers would raise, a little bit. But again, I think this is an encouragement that if you don't have super wealthy people on the board, that doesn't mean that you can't be successful, which is something I hear almost on a daily basis from people who are thinking about a campaign. Like, we have a community board. We don't have a ton of capacity. Can we still go out? Yeah, there are people out there with capacity who believe in you. We'll find them if you don't know who they are. By looking at the data. It doesn't have to come from the board. So this seems like a healthy kind of mix in terms of how much is there. If you need some help with that, we got an ebook on this specifically. And like I said, there's a lot of really smart people out there helping people with capital campaigns. Make sure that board piece is a component, because it really does kind of get its tentacles into the rest of the campaign for years as it goes along. So when you get the slides, you can grab this if you haven't scanned it already, but this is kind of an ebook there that talks about that. Cool. So we're almost, we got about 9 minutes. I'll wrap up here. I'm too long-winded. But you heard most of this already. Keep going. If you're on the fence, if you're worried about the economy, if you're worried about can we do this? You know, are we too small? I think almost everyone can do it. And there are some things that you do want to have in place for sure. And we can talk about those if you want to learn more. But you know, I kind of give you the formula there. The board is a big one there. So ask that of your people. Don't worry about the annual campaign. Again, it's not a foregone conclusion that that is going to go down, but be aware. That's kind of the other thing you might want to ask your people or your council. What are we going to do? Because we don't want to cannibalize that. You know, let's diversify those committees. It really does help a lot getting those perspectives on board. A feasibility study to me, I think, is worth it. You know, it's a lot of work. It can be an additional expense for sure. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can do it yourself. You can hire a consultant. You know, and the consultant can do the interviews for you. The consultant can help you do the interviews. There's a lot of methodologies within methodologies, but no matter what you choose, it does seem to be worth it. And small shops, you can do it just because you're small. Doesn't matter. You're awesome. So when you get the slides, if you're curious about our firm, that's in there. Let's do some questions. Jay, if you're still there, maybe I actually didn't have the question, but I had the chat box.
You've been answering them as they went
You
along.
the man.
Thank you so much. Well, let me see. We did have the one about a comprehensive campaign. I'm not sure if you took that on. That came in from Jennifer earlier.
Yeah.
I've been talking through it though because of the annual fund, but if you maybe you can address it more directly than that.
No, Jennifer, I'll be totally honest with you and everyone else. This was an area we didn't ask about, but it is on my short list of things that I'm kind of kicking myself. That's going to be in the next edition and editions going forward for sure. I can only speak, you know, anecdotally, and I'll probably do that offline if you want to keep talking, Jennifer. You got my email address. Yeah, I would suspect that the annual fund will come into play as Jay suggests there. So mea culpa on my part. That's an area we didn't ask about, but that will be rectified in future iterations of this survey.
Oh, and Stephen, we'll put your contact information. I think Jack can do that into
cool.
the.
Oh yeah, let me take this down. We'll have a conversation.
And it was said, and I don't know if we got it right then, but it's maybe you can just say it orally as well for the recording. How can people best reach you?
Just Stephen at capitalcampaignpro.com. And then I'm super active on LinkedIn. So if you want to send me an invite, just look for, you know, Capital Campaign Pro Stephen or Bloomerang Stephen will probably come up too, because I was there for so long. But I would love to get connected with you and you know, talk offline. That won't bother me at all.
Thank you so much. And we do have a question from Lori who had asked about whether or not it was becoming more commonplace to ask for maintenance and endowment gifts with a major gift for building and room and space, things like that.
Yeah, I saw that one from Lori. I think that's a really astute question. From my catbird seat, it's not becoming more common, but it is common. So, you know, a lot of people, endowment is kind of what they're raising money for. And what we recommend is, can we shift the language from perhaps an endowment to maybe an emerging artists fund, right? Maybe if you're an art center that's trying to create or bolster your endowment, what's that gonna do? That is in our experience a much stronger case for support. Or a scholarship fund is another real common sort of synonym or way of spinning that endowment fund in a way that is sort of actionable and maybe will be a little more enticing to donors. But it's common. So I don't, Lori, if that's something you want to do, I don't think that you should feel, odd about that, because it is common, and I don't necessarily think it's going to go away or probably grow too much. It might grow a little bit, but yeah, I think it's common. So I think you're right on there. But how can you really, and you said it, for a building or more space, that's what's really going to entice those people into wanting to get behind and make that happen.
Yeah, I guess part of that is what I'm hearing in that is also this idea that some donors are attracted to something that's tangible,
yes,
physical, and other people maybe something that's more programmatic or of the heart than something physical. Is that something you ran into very much either in this study or otherwise, and especially with respect to naming, where I know that becomes a little challenging, right? Because we can all see a plaque on the wall, but sometimes the virtual plaque is a little harder to conceptualize.
Yeah, and I would even add a third to your list is just the long-term I don't like the word sustainability, but just the fact, okay, is this organization going to be here for the long term? yeah, I'll give the endowment for that purpose. So, and I think that's why the feasibility study process is so important, because you will tease that out from the people you talk to, and you don't have to guess which of those things is really going to resonate with them. You'll know, and then you can have much better solicitations, and that's kind of a clinical term, but that, the ask is going to go a lot better when you're armed with that and you already have that rapport with the donor and kind of understand their goals for their philanthropic dollars.
I know you had, when I boil it down, at least three really big things, especially from that last slide, which is board support, especially
Yep.
early.
Yep.
Diversity of perspectives and the feasibility study, which can be done in a variety of ways, as you said.
Yeah.
This diversity of perspectives is interesting for so many reasons, but one way I'm wondering about it is in the feasibility study. Do you find when people are figuring out who to interview, that's one of the characteristics they want to think about, is not just who are the top 10 donors or the top 25 people in the community, but also kind of a diversity of perspectives?
For sure. And if you have your gift range chart created, you can kind of select that way, right? And I don't mean that, diversity is going to be in one particular piece of that pyramid. That's not what I mean at all. But yeah, that diversity in general is good, rather than just kind of front loading it with capacity. You may miss something for sure. So those interviews, couple dozen people, 30 people, that's going to give you a good variety of insights and opinions that could benefit multiple kind of factors of the campaign, in addition to just, who are you going to solicit for those 6-7 figure gifts? That's just one thing.
You've been doing this a while, and as you say, you're really into the data. What surprised you the most in what you learned, and what do you wish you had asked that you think you might ask next time?
Yeah, so I've got a whole list of stuff. One thing is kind of around pledges. That was a component that we didn't kind of dive into deeply, and that's, very often something that is part of a long-term campaign for sure, especially when we're talking about large gifts. Donors are probably gonna want to break those up over a multitude of years. So that's one thing. What Jennifer said about the comprehensive campaign is something we want to dig into for sure. And then I'm really curious, the people that, were mid-campaign in this survey, how has it gone since we last talked? Have you finished, and what happened? And then we can kind of compare it to those previous people that have finished, because every year, I don't know if you feel, Jay, but it seems like every year is wildly different. And, I can barely remember the 2000s and the early 2010s. So it's going to be interesting to see how these things kind of evolve over time. I think some things will stay the same. Like you said, the board engagement, I feel like, is always going to be key there. But I was happily surprised by the fact that people didn't pause for any of those reasons we mentioned. Maybe I was a bit pessimistic, but it was good to see that people kept their foot on the gas.
Well, since that's not the only big nasty surprise we're bound to get in our lifetimes,
Yep.
and as in the lifetimes of our organizations, it's good to know that we can always move forward. Thank you so much for all this, Stephen. Once again, we have your contact information right here in the chat. I want to encourage people to check out your work, all the way from what you're doing at Capital Campaign Pro to, of course, your book. And hopefully we can have you back, if not in between, definitely when the results of the next survey are out. And you said that people can be a part of this survey. Is that right? So
yeah, if they download the research, they'll get asked. They don't have to take the survey, obviously. But yeah, if you connect with me on LinkedIn and ask me directly, I'll get you on that for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of this. Really appreciate it, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been great having you and seeing you again. And I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us today. Really great to have you here. You're going to see a survey in a second when you leave the room. But even before that, you'll see a couple of slides with a little QR code. So Stephen was nice enough to mention DonorSearch. And if you want to know what he's talking about, since I didn't talk about it, you'll see a lot more about it when you just pull out your phones, grab that QR code, and take a look at what they have to offer. It's some interesting stuff there. Or you can just go over the DonorSearch site. And while you're there, please check out the Masterminds calendar. We have stuff coming up every single week. We would love you to be a part of it. So fill out the survey, check out that calendar, and we'll see you next time. Till then, take care. Thanks, Stephen.
Bye.